Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Tharoor, I wanted to start by asking about the whole idea that you be Rahul Gandhi's Manmohan Singh.
Where does this come from?
That, of
and
course,
what does it have to do with Hinduism and Hindutva?
For that, of course, Rahul Gandhi will first have to be Sonia Gandhi, but which is, I think, a little difficult. But the whole idea that you are the Prime Minister in waiting at what, some distant future? Is it ever going to happen?
No, first of all, I mean, this is really, really not a conversation that I particularly want to indulge in. I think that it's entirely clear that Rahul Gandhi doesn't need a Manmohan Singh, so that if he were to lead the country in the right direction, I'm sure he would be doing it himself without needing anyone else. Mrs. Gandhi stepped aside in 2004 for very well-known reasons. And I think those circumstances were unique and will not be repeated. So let's not even go there. But let's talk about education. Isn't that what we're here for?
Yes, but I wanted to also ask specifically about the All India Professionals Congress, right? Which you founded and which you are leading.
That's right.
Which I think is very significant because here you have the possibility of politics as a profession, which you've chosen.
In a sense, you're right, though I would like to think...
many other professions.
I'd like to think there's one profession I still haven't abandoned, which is the profession of a writer.
Writing, yes.
And
23 and counting?
23 books. And the thing is, for me, I'm very conscious. I've said this before. I mean, I'm already a former minister. One day I'll be a former MP, but I hope never to be a former writer or thinker. I mean, these are the things that ultimately I think will matter with what I leave behind. And so, for me, that's the larger legacy. But the All India Professionals Congress was actually an initiative that I took very soon after coming in. We finally got the party to buy into the idea only some years later. And then in 2017, it was launched. So we are in our 5th year now. The idea is, and you know, I grew up in a professional family. My father was an executive at a newspaper company, and his friends were other, they used to be called in Calcutta, fellow boxwalas. And what I would see is here are all these people working hard, serving the country by serving their professions, paying their taxes, and coming home in the evening and complaining about the politicians. And I wondered, why does it have to be that way? Why do they feel such a distance, such an alienation from the political process? Why can't we create a platform where the professional classes can actually have an opportunity to be heard by the politicians, to interact with politicians, to question politicians, and to give ideas to politicians. And all of these things were what the All India Professionals Congress was all about. So we set it up. I used to joke that it was kind of the Rotary Club within the Congress, because we wanted it to be organized in local chapters. One per Lok Sabha constituency.
I hope the Congress doesn't end as a Rotary Club.
Oh dear, Kavya.
The way it's going, unfortunately.
We are a very small part of a much larger organization in the Congress Party, and I think that the way things are going, we've certainly had a bit of a setback, but as I'm seeing with the interest and enthusiasm that my very small unit generates, we have presence in 28 states, we have chapters all over the country, and in fact, paradoxically, during COVID, we were probably more active than any other political entity, until, of course, the whole oxygen crisis got the Youth Congress out into the streets rather brilliantly. Until then, I think, you know, the body that was holding the largest number of gatherings on the net, webinars, seminars, we had the first ever discussion of biotechnologists was organized under our auspices. The 3 top vaccine manufacturers came together in an AIPC webinar to talk about how the vaccines would work. We did a whole lot of stuff on COVID that nobody else had done before us because professionals know how to use these tools. And so they were very quick off the feet during COVID. In addition to all the conventional stuff that people did later, distributing aid, relief, all of that, this was very important. And I would say that what I've learned from this platform is sometimes there are professionals who are as passionate about politics as politicians are, but who at the same time know they will never have the time for it because they have to practice their professions. So if it's only evenings or weekends or even, you know, an event a month, at least there's something there that will help channel that passion. But there are also some professionals who really want to be politicians and who can see a platform like this as an opportunity to get up and get themselves noticed by the political class. So we've had 1 or 2 of our members becoming television spokesmen. 1 or 2 of our members have contested even so far assembly type elections. And so there's a good sign that the sense that professionals and politicians are completely alienated from each other need not be there. And if we have shown this as one possible path, I have no problem if other political parties want to emulate us, because I really think that democracy is ill-served if an entire segment of the educated professional community stays away from its processes.
That's right. The topic is Hindutva or Hinduism, the civilizational debate. I wonder, I just wanted to look at it from a more personal point of view,
Sure.
from your point of view. Your education was largely colonial, shall we say, you know, St. Xavier.
I'm not sure the Jesuits would buy into that, but okay, fair enough.
But I wonder, and of course you went abroad at a very young age, yet you have written some of the most profound books on Hinduism and, you know, the impact on our way of life. I wonder at what point did that realization occur to you? And do you think that we have been ill-served by the education system that we have actually been living with? And you've been Minister of State for HRD before.
Yeah, that's right.
So I wonder what switch sort of flipped in your mind, and how can it happen with other people as well?
Right. Well, in my case, Kaveri, I'm afraid I'm probably an exception to the kind of thing that Prabhu talked about when he said, you know, people who had this convent education and value Macaulay more than the Mahabharata. I mean, my first novel was a retelling of the Mahabharata, so I don't think Prabhu could get away with that in my case. I haven't mentioned Macaulay until I wrote a book against British colonialism. So I think it's too easy for people to create these binaries and just put people on two sides of the divide. I think India is a more complex place than that, and I'm part of that complexity. I grew up in a very devout family. My parents certainly not only valued their faith and their Hinduism, but took us all off as kids on various pilgrimages to various temples. I've done one memorable sort of 3 or 4 week, I can't remember exactly how many weeks now, maybe longer, drive through southern India, through more than a dozen temples. When I was 14, my sisters were 10 and 8.
Okay.
And it was fascinating because, you know, my parents then not only had to teach us what we were doing and why, you know, why we were getting our heads tonsured as an offering to the gods, or why we were, you know, I didn't like one or two temples, the priests being rather grubby and sticking their hands out for cash, and my father said, well, they've got to live too, and they've got to look after their families, and we have to understand. And all sorts of conversations about the faith as it was practiced.
Right.
And then, of course, the fact that you observe in your families how the faith is practiced. And I've written, going back now 25 years in my book, India from Midnight to the Millennium, I wrote about watching my father, who devoutly prayed every single day of his life after his bath, after his shower, but never...
Wherever in the world he was.
Wherever in the world he was, but never obliged me to join him. Because he felt very much in the Hindu way that you must find your own truth.
Right.
Each of us has to seek his or her own truth and find it, and it's not for him to tell me. I mean, that I found very, very central to the way in which he understood Hinduism and I did. And as a very young college student, I became a great fan of Vivekananda's writings. Swami Vivekananda, of course, had the additional merit for us, the colonized. Where is Prabhu? He's walked out on me.
No, he's right there.
For us, the colonized, because Swami Vivekananda did most of his preaching in English.
Yes.
Most of his speeches are in English.
How were you introduced to...
Not just in...
how were you introduced to Swami Vivekananda? Was it through the mission?
I read widely and indiscriminately, and history was my passion. So, I even from school days, I read way beyond the syllabus because these are the ways you find out about the world. And so, I'm sure that I'd come across something by Swami Vivekananda very early on and then read more. And in fact, in my final year of university in Delhi, I was invited, I think I was told I was the youngest ever to deliver the Vivekananda Memorial Lecture that Delhi University had in 1974-75.
How old were you?
19.
Wow.
Well, not yet 19. So it was for me something that really captivated me. And I thought, because indeed he was so accessible
Yeah.
through the English language, you never felt that you had the barrier of translation or impenetrable shlokas that you were not sure you fully understood or had been correctly translated.
And he spoke about young people and young men.
He spoke
all
about
the time.
everything. I mean, you know, he wandered through the country and then would remark that, you know, I sometimes wonder whether it's, the country needs more sadhus going through villages or people who will actually teach them science and mathematics.
Right.
He actually said that. I mean, this is the kind of mind, very modern mind.
And he talked about football, he talked about sport, he talked about what to eat, what not to eat.
And he was quite iconoclastic about some cultural practices. For example, he wrote some of the first strongest language against child marriage.
Yes.
You know, giving away girls aged 8 in marriage is considered a crime. And those were not necessarily views you ever expected to hear from a saffron-robed monk. But he was very much a reformer with passionate ideas about what was worth preserving in our culture. And above all, I would say a very deep understanding of this, that, as he said in Chicago, that Hinduism is not just about tolerance, it's about acceptance. And I like that because right from my school days as a student, I'd always thought that tolerance was basically a very patronizing idea.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, somebody's
And it's very passive.
Yeah, somebody's sitting here and saying, look, I have the truth, you are in error,
Yeah.
but I will generously indulge you in your right to be wrong. Whereas acceptance is much more. Acceptance is, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. And to my mind, this was such a terrific insight of Vivekananda. He frequently used to quote the Shiva Mahimna Stotram, which says that just as many rivers flow straight or crooked, sometimes in this direction, sometimes that direction, but end up in the same sea, so also all different ways of worship end up at the same divine. And this idea was, to me, what strengthened Hinduism, because it meant that I did not have to judge others negatively for following their paths. I had been told that their paths were valid, my path is valid, makes no difference. So in these circumstances, naturally, I became a convinced sort of pluralist or secularist or whatever word you want to use, in that I felt it was perfectly valid to respect others, respect their faiths, beliefs, and habits. You know, I was thinking about this hijab controversy. I went to school in Bombay, and the streets, you can find every single kind of clothing available.
And headgear.
Headgear, turbans, patkas, caps, fezzes. I mean, you know, how did it matter? It didn't, because we just lived with diversity as a basic aspect of our reality. To my mind, these are things that, that are not sufficiently appreciated by those who try and reduce things to simple black and white. Hinduism is this and Hinduism is
Because
that.
while you were all doing all this, you were also playing Romeo to Mira Nair's Juliet.
There you are. No,
At
it
St.
was Antony to Mira Nair's
Oh,
Cleopatra.
sorry, Antony to Mira Nair's
a
Cleopatra.
somewhat decrepit Romeo and Juliet. But anyway.
So it was that wonderful synthesis that we all talk about, the whole internationalism and yet being Indian. But not everybody is able to grasp that.
I don't know why. For example, from class 10 onwards, my attire was a kurta rather than a Western-style shirt.
In college as well?
In college throughout, everybody...
You must have been an oddball.
Not necessarily, not necessarily. In any case, as I said, because diversity was rampant and people did wear whatever they wanted to, no one particularly noticed, but I was consistently in a kurta throughout. In fact, I had a particular fondness for red. I mean, so there was a sort of crimson Tharoor running around, even campaigning for the presidency of the Union in my kurta, and I won at St. Stephen's College. And at the same time, there we were debating in English. I founded the Quiz Club, which was the first ever quiz club in any college campus in India. And I'm delighted there are now thousands mushrooming around the country.
Of course.
So all of that, I mean, what I really valued, I think, was not any of the colonial aspects of education, because I was pretty anti-colonial from those days, from my high school days. But the fact that the system that we had enabled so much of free thought, enabled us to come up with our own ideas, invent our own practices and institutions, and at the same time that even some of the pleasures that the language opened to us were subversive ones. I mean, Nehru wrote The Discovery of India in English. The fact that he chose English did not make the language became an instrument to channelize, to channelize opposition to the colonizer. And similarly, today, I mean, I could find in post-independence India that I could use English to advance ideas that the British may not have welcomed, but which certainly took my notion of Indianness further. And then on top of that, I had a pan-Indian upbringing. I was born in London, yes, but I grew up from the age of 2.5 in Bombay, went to high school in Calcutta, college in Delhi, and my parents are both from Palakkad, so we used to go back every year on vacation to a village in Kerala. And a village where really no other language is spoken but Malayalam, and therefore one absolutely had to pick it up for survival's sake. Now, with that kind of pan-Indian background sensibility, the good thing is I feel at home anywhere in India. I don't feel out of place. And I have friends and networks, as it were, in all these places. But equally, the sort of bad thing, if you like, is that when I started wooing the woman who became the mother of my children, the first language, in fact, the best language we had in common was English. But that because too is a political... She's half Bengali, half Kashmiri.
Right.
So she had both Hindi, because it's Allahabad Kashmiri. She's Dr. Kailashnath Kaju's granddaughter. And at the same time, Bengali. And of course, once any bit of Bengali blood gets into you, become a Bengali chauvinist. Yes. So she was that, and she was very strongly... And so when I was listening to Vice President Venkaiah Naidu this morning, saying that there must be no imposition, no opposition, that must be the position. I thought about it, was typical Venkaiah ji's kind of line. But the problem is, if you outlaw opposition, then it becomes an imposition. So that's something which I think we have to worry about, because here in Tamil Nadu in particular, the opposition to Hindi is genuine and heartfelt. And Venkaiah Saab puts himself really in the position of saying that Hindi should be learned everywhere. When he says, why should you object to learning Hindi? That's perfectly reasonable, provided it's not compulsory.
Right.
If I have the right to learn Hindi, or I want to learn Tamil, or I want to learn Malayalam, and I'm free to do all of those things, great. But if we have a situation where we are told that Hindi is a compulsory subject, why should you object? It will help you in life. Therefore, learn it. That's not good enough, because obviously, as people like Dr. Ambedkar, Rajagopalachari, and others said at that time, this is actually going to be a form of oppression, which could end up dividing the country very seriously. So, to my mind, we have to really find a genuine formula that gives people the freedom to learn languages of their choice that may or may not be useful to them, but respect their choice. I mean, let's face it, as I've often pointed out in the North, there is no North Indian school that is teaching Tamil or Malayalam. There just isn't. There are hundreds of South Indian schools that are teaching Hindi. So, if some schools in the South and some school children in the South feel it could be useful for them to know Hindi, great. Nobody in the North thinks it's useful for them to know Tamil. That's their problem. But the fact is that...
Which is a pity, because they should.
They should, but the fact is that's the reality. And therefore, once you say, no, but Hindi must be the language of administration, every government file notation must be in Hindi, every MP must speak in Hindi, ministers in parliament will answer questions asked in English in Hindi, then you are really saying that it's perfectly all right for Singh and Sharma and Shukla to grow up with the language they've been speaking since their mother's laps, whereas, Reddy and Subramaniam and Menon and Soundararajan will suddenly have to flounder in a language that they have otherwise had no reason to acquire. Now, that is what could divide the country. It's much more important that everybody has some means of communication in common, and that could, for whatever historical reasons we may or may not like, be nothing other than English, because at least when we meet across these various linguistic divides, English is something where we are all at an equal disadvantage or an equal advantage.
Of course, not
everywhere
everyone
in the country
can speak and write as well as you, Dr. Tharoor. You have to acknowledge that.
No, but then, not everyone can speak and write Hindi as well as Mr. Modi can either. And we mustn't leave out those who can't do it.
Some applause for that. Dr. Tharoor, when one looks at what's happening in the world right now, especially with Indian students in Ukraine, you've been a minister of HRD, you've been external affairs minister as well, minister of state, right? So what does one do with a situation like that? The Prime Minister, of course, conveniently blames the past, says we've not had enough supply of seats, therefore our children have had to go outside to learn medicine. But really, what does one do with a situation where you're not able to provide young people in this country an adequate level of education, an adequate livelihood. And that's really the biggest issue we have right now.
No, I agree with that. In fact, I have been writing against the restrictive approach we have in this country to the creation of adequate seats in medicine. It used to be like that in engineering. That changed. Now we have a surplus of engineering seats, and engineering colleges are even closing. I'd love to get to a situation like that, because what we are seeing is, because of the over-regulation in the system, there is no incentive, even for those private colleges in the medical sector, to add to enough seats.
Right.
So we have an absurd situation. There is a national examination called the NEET, which Tamil Nadu doesn't like.
Yeah.
But the NEET exam, every year, some 14 to 16 lakh students take it. I think 8.75 lakh pass it, and only 10% of them can get a medical seat in India, because there are only 87,000 seats in India. Now, there's something wrong with this picture.
Right.
If there are 90% more kids who are qualified to study medicine, have an interest and an aptitude in studying medicine, why have we created a regulatory system that makes it impossible for them to study medicine in India?
And as you said, it's also badly governed.
If you looked at the numbers of Indians, after people discovered we had 23,000 medical students in Ukraine, somebody started collecting all the numbers. Do you know we even have 5,000 medical students in Bangladesh?
Right.
Now you tell me, are they offering you a better education there? Yeah. No, it's simply they have more seats available, and this is absurd. They're as overpopulated as we are. In fact, probably densely speaking more so. So there's something wrong with the system that doesn't make it possible. Thank you so much. That doesn't make it possible for our students to have opportunities here. Even as minister, I remember saying at that time the number was, we were spending, Indian parents are spending $2 billion a year. Now it's definitely gone up. I read a recent figure saying it's closer to $5 billion a year sending their children to study abroad.
Right.
Not just medicine, other subjects too.
Yeah.
When they could have been quite happy to educate them in India, but there weren't quality opportunities available. Let's face it, as a hyper-competitive society, if you sit an entrance exam, for medicine, it's 10% of those who pass who can get seats. In places like the IITs, it's 1%.
1%.
So 1% get in. Naturally, there will be some just after that 1% marking who are going to say, well, we could go to a much more inferior college, or we'll go abroad because our parents can afford to, or we can take a loan, or we'll mortgage our house,
which they've done.
And this is what so many are doing.
Yeah.
So I've been arguing. In fact, I used to have a column in the Times of India before I came into politics, and I've written a column there saying we need to let 1,000 educational flowers bloom. Now, I'm not going to pinpoint blame on either a particular class of people or politicians or institutions. All I will say is that we as a nation need to fix this problem, because otherwise we're going to continue to find our students, our young children, spending sort of their parents' hard-earned money, going off to get qualifications, and in any case, half the time aren't recognized yet. They've got to come back and take another exam to qualify and practice, and some do and some don't, and there's all sorts of stuff going on. I think that we really need to make it possible for our young students. And now, I should stress, when I was in HRD, since you asked about that, I actually did raise the issue, and I was told it was none of my business because medical education comes under the Health Ministry and not under the HRD.
And it continues to be so.
Continues to be so. So these are some of the challenges. We haven't talked about Hindutva and Hinduism, but simply I think the issue there was very simply that this government since 2014 has rather systematically set about rewriting textbooks. And on that, what they've done, I mean, because
but in states rather than NCERT.
No, but you see, it is a state subject.
Yeah.
Other than the Kendriya Vidyalayas and the Jawahar Vidyalayas, very few central schools, everyone else at the secondary and primary levels of education are in state-run institutions following state syllabi. Now, the central government can come up with a guidance through the NCERT, which gives you a standard syllabus and text and so on. But actually, states write their own thing. So the result you're seeing is that you will find textbooks, for example, I think Rajasthani textbooks in history I was reading somewhere have eliminated all references to the Mughal Empire. Here are these people who ruled us for 350 years and were considerable, and were the largest empire on the earth at that time and the most prosperous. And you don't study about them. What kind of history are you studying? Or you study that the result of a particular battle, Haldighati, Actually, it was the opposite of what history teaches us it was, because you want to extol the Hindu king in that particular battle and not the Muslim one. Ironically, the Muslim one, Akbar, was represented in the battlefield by a Hindu general, and the Hindu king Maharana Pratap was represented by a Muslim general, Hakim Khan.
That's India for you.
So that is India. So this kind of revision of history to serve very, very petty political purposes and to fuel the kind of anti-Muslim bigotry that some people have actually found a profitable exercise. To my mind, this is truly shameful, and I would be disappointed if our country allowed itself to see the injection of this toxin into the brains of our young children at school. And the sad consolation is that most of our kids don't remember what they studied in school anyway.
Yeah,
so they'll probably forget
history,
this brainwashing also. But at the same time, it's rather unfortunate. That was on the larger issue.
What is the one thing your life, you think, can teach a young Indian student who wants to know the world, who wants to learn, who wants to do things? What is the one thing he could possibly learn from you?
Well, I mean, I keep trying. I mean, in my case, for example, I was inconveniently good at taking exams, which I accept not everyone else is, and therefore I did constantly have multiple options. I came first in science throughout, but chose to stream into humanities, and my teachers summoned my parents to school to complain, why is our best science student doing this? And I was able to persuade my parents. My father was very understanding. I said, listen, I don't like the subject. I forget everything I've studied after I've written the exam, whereas you ask me about history or literature beyond the syllabus, and I know, I've read, and therefore this is what I would rather go and study. And similarly, I aced the exams. I got what was called 5 points in those days, the highest in the country. And so my parents said, at least do economics and get a well-paying job after that. I said, no, I want to study history. And they said, but who studies history? What do you gain from that? And the net result was that they gave in, let me study history. So I was lucky in that sense. But I will say to everyone, however good you are, whether it requires more effort, more hard work or whatever, merit can get you very far. I mean, I got my scholarships to go abroad from institutions, obviously, that I had no connection whatsoever to and no one to recommend me for, no godfathers. And at every stage of my life, it was merely my ability of, yes, passing examinations, getting good grades helped. And so I was able to shape my destiny, as it were, by making choices that nobody else was making for me. To some degree, the message is not so much to students, but to their parents.
Yeah.
Please don't try and get your children to fulfill your dreams for you. There are too many Indian parents who say, I never became a doctor and engineer, so my son or daughter will.
Asian parents syndrome.
I would urge the parents to please just let the children follow their bliss, follow their passions, discover their passions, and discover themselves in the process. Remember, at the end of the day, long after we, the parents, are gone, these are the kids who are going to wake up in the morning, having a job to go to, having a profession to follow, having a dream to pursue. And that will not be possible for them if you have, or will not be possible for them with happiness if you have shoehorned them into something they never wanted to do, but you wanted them to do. So my request really is, if I was lucky in my choice of parents, I certainly hope that your kids will also feel that their parents gave them support in encouraging them to do what makes them happy, because it's going to be their life that they're going to be happy in the future.
Thank you very much. And I think we learned a lot, especially his fascination for Swami Vivekananda. Thank you very much, Dr. Tharoor, for joining us and coming all the way here. Thank you.
Thanks.